Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I'm your host, Edgar Mills. Thank you for joining us. Hello, America. Welcome back to episode 68. I am going to continue on, based off the last episode, I'm going to continue on with some contradictions. So I'm going to focus down. I'm going to do a series of these, but I mean, what causes debate? What causes a topic to be interesting? Usually it's because it presents some kind of contradiction of some sort, or conflict anyway. But today, I want to talk about a very obvious and psychological inconsistency and in today's discourse over gender, and specifically how a lot of trans and non-binary types lecture biological males and females on loving yourself and accepting other people for who they are, and meanwhile they kind of reject their own natural bodies, don't they? And then try to, well, as we're going to see in a sec, Ellen Page is trying to rewrite biological fact to accommodate her own psychosis. So yeah, Elliot Page just came out with a documentary, and the whole documentary I've only seen little bits. I'm not going to critique the documentary, but I'm going to critique her presentation of it that I've heard, is that everything we've been taught about gender in our entire lives throughout history is a construct. It's not, gender is not natural. And it was all lies and built on a, quote, quaint fantasy. So, I don't know. It hurts me a little bit. I always thought Ellen Page was, if you remember the movie Juno, one, it was a brilliant movie, and two, she was brilliant in it. And, you know, and then there was a movie called Whip It. She was in it, and I think that was directed by like Drew Barrymore. I don't know. It was a fun movie. I liked it. I'm going to admit that I liked it. It was fun. It was easy breezy. Yeah. I liked the premise of it. She was trying to find her own little way, and found roller derby. Yeah, it was fun. Yeah. So she did an appearance on Democracy Now!, however much credibility you give that outlet. And she, by the way, is a biological female. Whatever she looks like now, she's a biological female. And she said, and I quote, she tries to block out the noise from, absolute vile losers who must just be so profoundly uncomfortable with themselves that they can't handle that someone could get to a place that I think trans people do get to, which is a level of self-acceptance and understanding that I think is really profound and beautiful. I don't know about that self-acceptance. I don't know how profound and beautiful it is. Maybe internally for yourself, possibly. I don't know that I'm a vile loser for disagreeing. This statement that she made implies that any disagreement with the trans ideology, or disagreement with any chemical or surgical gender swapping, basically amounts to a personal pathology in me, or in the dissenter, the person who disagrees. Like I got some kind of sickness for not agreeing with her. And that anybody who does critique that must be profoundly uncomfortable with themselves. And if we challenge her beliefs, this is what this statement implies, that if we challenge her beliefs, that we are vile losers. Now, to me, she's a young woman who never grew up and had identity crisis. That's what I see. But that ideology, and when I say ideology, I mean that of the whole trans community thing, the binary, non-binary, transgender stuff. I'm not just talking about gay people, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about trans. And that ideology has become a belief system and like a religion of sorts. And if you're a part or around that, or then you cannot violate that dogma. You just can't. And I don't know who said it. I'm not sure that it's ever been formally quoted, but if your religion can't be challenged, it's a cult. And they've made a religion out of transgenderism. But what they've done is they've made a cult out of it, in my opinion. And I'm not talking about every trans person. Not everybody is deep in ideologically. It's such a complex situation. And we'll see why it's so complex here in a little bit. There's a lot of mental stuff going on. Ellen Page, she came out as a lesbian in like 2014 or 15 or something. And then she came out as a transgender man in 2020. And then had a mastectomy and got her boobs chopped off. And did the hormones and all that. And you see her now, and she looks like a haggard little boy. And her stated goal was to escape the body and social role of a woman and achieve harmony with her internal sense of self. So, to escape the body of a woman and the social role, I think the social role has much bigger implications there than just the body. If you want to be, with all the psychology, I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever. I don't know. But her internal sense of self, there's about 8 million ways to rectify that without surgery and trying to change gender, but that's a way, I guess. And this documentary she's come out with, Pageboy is what it's called. She talks about years of discomfort and anxiety and a sense that she's never been a girl and that she'll never be a woman. And that's complex psychological stuff going on inside of her brain. And she chose her path. I don't think she chose wisely, but she chose it. But it ain't about that she chose her path. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that she chose her path, and now she expects everyone fully be on board with that path, and furthermore, urge other people to do it, as if it was some sort of religion that she's trying to convert people, followers, believers. But the contradiction here is what's also pretty profound. The same person who accuses the critics of self-hate for refusing to affirm her path, her change of identity, attempted physical change of identity. She herself spent years hating her own natural female body and took drastic steps to change it, to reach this beautiful and profound self-acceptance that she now wields against us like a weapon. So we're accused and blamed even for her discomfort and her inability to make it right and her angst that motivated the whole thing in the first place. Now, I think we'll get to it here in a little while. We will. We'll get to it. So, what does loving yourself mean when it comes to body mutilation or modification or whatever? So, there's a message out there pushed by like the celebrities and the fringe celebrity and activists that love is love. They got it on posters and shit. Love is love. And you must love and accept people as they are. They would demand that you love and accept them as they are, regardless of what they've changed themselves to be. But yet the core characteristic of gender dysphoria is that they cannot accept the body as it is. They don't love as they are. It's bizarre. It's absolutely opposite. Now the message is love for sure, but you can just take hormones and chemicals and major surgery and add or remove any fabricated sex organs you want and do surgery on otherwise healthy tissue that doesn't require it, and do whatever you need to do to ease your emotional angst. So that's not loving people as they are, and that's not loving yourself as you are. That's taking very extreme, drastic measures. You don't love the body you're in. I don't think that's to do with the body as much as it is to do with something up here. And treating your body like sort of like a project that you can reshape and change until your mind can tolerate it. You're basically trying to be godlike in that you think you can change it. A tormented God for sure, but you think you can make these changes that nature, God, evolution, whatever you want to call it, has given the world. You are not God, and removing your penis or breasts or whatever is not the same as going to the gym to try to be more healthy. Now, you can liken it, I think, to all this plastic surgery. I think you can liken it to that. I think those are getting these asses and the lips and all that stuff. I think this is in the same category. I think this is very closely related. Maybe not as extreme, but mentally it is as extreme. And then the non-binary people. So they take this a step further by rejecting the fact that sex is binary, male and female. But they still demand that you recognize their bizarre thoughts on that and make accommodations for that. Sometimes even medical accommodations. And that not only in that accommodation, but you treat their feelings as authoritative over observable biology. Man, it's madness. It's madness. And if you're in this community, this trans or binary group of humans out there, and if you're listening to this, I hope you are. There is a reality. There is a reality, and you don't have to be okay with it. And if you take the leap to do whatever changes you want to do to present yourself as something that you were not born as, that is on you, and you're free to do as you will. And furthermore, from my perspective, and I think even from sort of a broader libertarian perspective, and even a really truly Christian perspective, you're not going to be, well, you may be judged a little bit, but you're not going to be. No, I'm saying Christian. There are Christians out there that will belittle you and whatever. But look, many that I know are just going to pray for you. And they're not going to belittle you, and they're not going to do anything else. They're just going to pray for you. So you don't see those people. So you feel like it's a battle of you against the established world. The problem becomes when you try to militantly push that ideology as normal. It's not. It's not normal. Or you try to, like Ellen Page here, belittle the wide world for being vile losers, for not accepting what you've chosen to do with yourself. I don't have to accept it. I can tolerate it. I don't have to accept it. And I certainly don't have to promote it. So, at any rate, there's that. So let's kind of get that out of the way early. Do as you will. If I think you're wrong, I think you're wrong. So what? Don't try to convince the world that what you're doing is right and normal and natural. It is not. And you know deep inside that it is not. You know deep inside that you've got some torment, some internal torment there that you're trying to deal with. And somehow that's what you've come to. That's the way you've chosen to deal. So what I'm getting at, to lecture normally gendered people, man and woman as they are, whose natural sex and identity match. And that's to include gay men and women, by the way. We don't have to, we have to observe what you are presenting, but we don't have to affirm it. And whatever declared identity you have, you declare whatever you want. All we have to go on is what you present. But because we reject the ideology, or even because we disagree with the path you've chosen, does not reveal some secret torment that we have. That doesn't make us messed up at all. You just don't like the sort of widely accepted definition of normal. And that's not to say normally gendered people aren't screwed up in 8 million other ways. But we're talking about a very specific thing here. We're talking about transgendering and non-binary. That's what we're talking about. So just because we refuse to participate in this semantic acrobatics of genders or pronoun or whatever it is, or we refuse to implement policy to accommodate your extreme fringe decisions, that is not bigotry, and it is not that we're projecting somehow. Because the demand, it seems, especially from Ellen Page, the demand seems to be that society must not only tolerate, but accept and celebrate this manipulation and many times mutilation of healthy bodies, just so that you can match your subjective state of existence, your state of mind. Gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria. It don't exist in a vacuum. You weren't born that way. And the gays will be mad at me for saying this, and people I know who are trans will probably be mad at me for saying this. I don't think it occurs naturally. Now, and let me step that back. There are anomalies out there, and we'll address them. But large-scale data, empirical data, shows that there are extremely high rates of comorbidities coming along with this gender dysphoria. So we'll start with neurodevelopmental disorders like autism or attention deficit hyper disorder. Excuse me. Those show up in the general, the clinical population, right? People transgender who go to get not help, but to transgender, you still got to go through a process. That shows up higher than in the general public. And psychiatric conditions like depression, anxiety, PTSD, eating disorders, substance abuse, suicidal ideations, all these are extremely high amongst us trans and non-binary. community. And then there's the externals. Now, this is where I think the majority of this stuff comes from. I believe the majority of it comes from external input. And one of the big ones is childhood sexual abuse. Yeah, you can't deny it. It might not be your case, but you can't deny that it's largely present in the trans community. Physical abuse, substance abuse, emotional trauma, and other, just negative experiences as a youth, even maybe before you remember. There's always external influences going on all the time. That is what the social media is doing. And before the social media, television, before television, newspaper. There's externals. There's always someone with an agenda pushing messages. There's always individuals with agendas. And they're influencing you, whether you directly realize it or not. Especially on television. Hell, before MTV, I don't even know that they went off the air as MTV, but man, they had all these drag shows and all this and that. I've known and consorted with plenty of gays and transgender people in my day. And one of the common themes about the people I knew was that they knew that they were on the fringe of society and they liked it that way. That was their rebellion. They wanted to be that. They didn't seek necessarily widespread acceptance. Yeah, of course, rights. Like you, as just a gay man, you shouldn't have any less rights than a straight man. But they were on the fringe and they understood it and knew it and sort of reveled in it. But MTV, among others, tried to drag the RuPaul. They just made this big gaudy show about drag queens and all this and that. And then that gave way to drag queen story time in elementary schools. You see what I'm saying? Was it a direct result? No, it was indirect, but it still same. They wanted to be on the fringes. They wanted to be edgy. It was edgy. Now it's not at all. Now it's just passé and getting pretty tedious. All right, let's go to some official stuff. The Cash Review out of the UK, it was a review that was released in 2024, documented that young people that presented with gender-related issues had very complex mental health profiles, autism, traumatic histories, and all sorts of other comorbidities or co-occurring issues. And what they did also note that there was a sharp rise in mental referrals, especially among adolescent females, that paralleled a downturn in the youth mental health that paralleled with the rise of social media. Yeah, I just said it, folks. Now it's all over. It's everywhere. You're getting it from all ends. And this creates confusion with the young people. You got little non-binaries and trans people all over doing weird shit and saying all these things as fact, like Ellen Page is just trying to say that gender is a construct. Well, I was born with a cock. It's there. My nuts and my balls are there, or my dick is there. That's not a social construct. Well, just because you have a cock and balls doesn't mean you're a man. I beg to differ. There's chromosomes, there's DNA, there's all these things that say that I'm a man. Yeah, a rise of social media created a rise of mental health issues amongst the youth, especially among the female youth, unfortunately. And that review also came to the conclusion with strong evidence that puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones in minors had very weak or negative results, especially and because there's no long-term data on it. So the known risks, because there are multiple, in this report, the known risks were being put aside for the unknown utopia, where in fact, in standard medicine and standard practice, you're going to take a known risk. If it outweighs the benefit, you're not going to do it. That's a risk assessment. Hey, well, this is bad and this is most likely going to happen. Well, what's the good? Well, you'll feel really good about yourself for about 10 minutes. Long-term data out of Sweden. Europe's been messing around with this stuff for a long time, longer than America. Long-term data out of Sweden on adults who got sex reassignment surgery found that the suicide rates remained 19 times higher than that of the control groups, straight people or people who didn't get surgery, and also showed extremely high psychiatric morbidities. Excuse me. It's a mental issue. It's not a physical issue. It's not a social construct. And the authors of this Swedish report noted that, yeah, surgery may alleviate a very certain specific dysphoria, but it doesn't touch on any of the other issues, the core issues, the foundational issues of why you're. So, yeah, it's just a big, massive, drastic fix for one very small problem. All the other problems remain. So all that data, and not just all that data, but plenty of other data that I looked at, it's crystal clear to me that the majority of the cases that gender dysphoria is entangled with and exacerbated by other pre-existing psychological issues. It's not a standalone issue most of the time. And certainly not just your true identity to be treated by surgery. And the method of just affirmation, like, oh, we must affirm that's bizarre. So you're taking a psychological issue and you're saying, no, yeah, you're absolutely right. So that's just making it worse. And that creates very high risk that reinforces their own narrow focus of what's going on within their identity, and that don't address any of the other issues. And that's what's going on. And that's almost like a denial. It is. It's a denial that's what's going on, that I see with the Ellen Pages of the world, is that not only are they trying to tell us that, oh, well, nature's the reason she believes that gender is a construct and sex is a construct, is that she's been affirmed and reaffirmed over and over again. And nobody's ever said, hey, you might have a fucking problem. Because if you challenge her, you're a bigot or a homophobe or a transphobe. So then we look at exploratory therapy that explores the whole broad range of mental problems. And activists like Ellen Page want to reframe that. And in some places that is banned as conversion therapy. So that's how they want to frame it up. Well, you're trying to convert me. And that just narrows the options for actual genuine wellness by rejecting, well, multiple options, complex options that might be needed most. The contradiction is monumental. Then let's get into non-binary a little bit. I was talking about transgender mostly there. the non-binary sort of kids who identify that, right? That's mostly in young adults. And that surged among young adults and over the past, 10 years maybe. It doesn't have any clinically, it doesn't have any sort of long-standing sort of persistent dysphoria in that you see with the trans. It correlates more with social media and online influences and all these other externals. And the psychology of it kind of involves like just exploration, gender exploration, and peer pressure. Because, hey, that community can pressure like no other. And then you got all the pop, you got the, Gagas and all these out there who push all this shit. And so, yeah, they're exploring all these identities. I'm non-binary. I'm not this or that. Well, and then I think sooner or later, you ultimately grow out of that. I think the non-binary stuff is a little more superficial than the trans stuff. I think the trans stuff is superficial, but on a much deeper level. I know that's a contradiction. Superficial on a deeper level. They're so wrapped up with what they look like on the surface. Whereas non-binaries they're exploring, and it's just surface level exploring. For the most part. All right. So how do we get to this place so far? And how do we get to this place so far? Well, it started in the 70s. And, the conversation started in the 70s. I'm not saying there hasn't been trans, cross-dressers and whatnot, and trans people or whatever, prior to that. In 1973, the APA, the American Psychological Association, removed homosexuality from the DSM. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And apparently it's the authority on all things mental disorder, right? But in 1973, it was removed as a mental disorder. And it was not because of any new studies or any new scientific breakthroughs. Nope. It was because of heavy activist pressure, including protests and disruptions of APA goings-ons, meetings and events, membership votes, all the things. It was activists protesting these people. And so that prompted, and with that protest, read intimidation. And that's arguable. Some people deny that the doctors were intimidated. Of course, they're going to deny that. But ultimately, that intimidation and all those protests prompted Dr. Robert Spitzer to reclassify and go and kind of change the metric a little bit. And it was a doctor-led process for sure, but not organically, not based off new information, just pressure. And so they took it out of DSM because the activist says, "Oh, that's oppressive. It's oppressive to call me, to tell me I have a mental disorder. Love is love." Transsexualism didn't even get into the DSM until 1980. Now, since then, revisions of the DSM since then have softened the language on it and has shifted kind of emphasis on where the problem actually is. But I think one of the revisions, it became gender dysphoria, and it focused on distress rather than identity, right? The problems you feel from this versus the identity you want to present. So even then, they soften it up so much so that, well, you're okay. And then in the International Classification of Diseases, the ICD, they was labeled gender incongruence, and they eventually took out the mental disorders chapter out of that completely. So all these changes occurred under pressure, however. Pressure on the professional bodies themselves, pressures on medical organizations, pressures on media. Media is the one doing the pressuring now, right? They're all on board with whatever the party line is. So again, it was social and political activism that pressured the changes, not science. Whereas Ellen Page is telling us that it was social pressure that caused us to create gender. Well, demonstrably here we see that it's actually social and political pressure that's causing us to try to erase it. So these activists living in their little social structure that refuses to call out gender dysphoria and other related pathologies for their true nature, which is sort of identity crisis along with psychiatric, overlaps. They operate through multiple and very organized lines of effort. That's how the pressure works. That's how any pressure works. Multiple organized lines of effort. You can apply that to anything. Well, they've picked up the tactics. So they pressure institutional. They influence institutions. So the guidelines from these medical groups prioritize affirmation versus actual treatment. And furthermore, treat dissent as illegitimate. Like if I disagree with it, I'm wrong. And then there's sort of social and professional influence where they label any disagreement as hate or bigotry or a phobia. So it makes disagreeing with them very costly, right? You get cancel culture because because you're full of hate. And then that feeds into the, controlling the narrative. And they try to frame it as a civil rights issue and that we were born this way. So therefore it's a civil rights issue. And they just completely ignore the mental health aspect of the whole thing. And the fact that you're doing medical surgery on healthy tissue. Then they try to influence the legal aspect, the policy aspect of it from the government perspective with all this gender affirming care that then they expect other people to pay for because they try to shape it up as it's settled science. Well, hopefully this podcast here alone will tell you that it's not settled science at all. There's very little and very weak evidence that there are any benefits from transitioning long term, especially for youth. And for those of you out there who do agree with giving minors hormones or puberty blockers or whatever, I think you're criminal. Literally, I think that is criminal. That is child abuse. You are trying to influence your child. Just because a 7-year-old tells you a 7-year-old boy says, "Oh, mommy, I like dresses." You're not letting this child develop naturally. So the earlier you try to disrupt that natural progress, the more culpable you are, the more criminal you are. Hey, once you're grown, do what you want. I'll go have coffee with you either way. Don't think I'm a bigot. I'm not. I'm just telling you what I see as facts or backed by evidence. So anyway, these people, all these activists and the pressure, and what this creates is a goddamn feedback loop, and where the actual true classifications of an illness or the treatment models They're not informed by data, by science, by fact. They're informed by political and social cost of questioning them. It gets very costly to battle the TQIA plus cartel. And yes, I left LGB out of that on purpose. That's a whole nother episode. So the contradictions are plentiful, folks. The contradictions are plentiful. The very segment of society screaming about fascist and oppression use fascist and oppressive tactics to defy nature and science, and then force not only tolerance, but acceptance and celebration of their own distorted reality. Because it is a distorted reality. So the way it is now, it ain't love is love. The way it is now is you are either an ally in full support or you're an enemy to be deleted. That's the way it is now. That's what happens when we keep on with these extreme measures and this extreme hyperbole. The loudest voices out there, they insist on all this radical self-acceptance and universal acceptance for people as they are. And I'm here for it. I'm here for that. Yeah, I'm here for that. I accept people as they are. Even if you have done full-blown sexual transition, but we can have a well-mannered, polite conversation. Yeah, I'm here for it. Do I think you're wrong? Yeah, probably. Yeah, but so what? So these loud voices demanding, but in practice, they demand that you accept the proposition that the natural body can be rejected and medically altered to match whatever state of mind you feel, without acknowledging that the state of mind itself may be wrong. They can't even allow that, hey, I may be wrong. And that's arrogance. And that anybody who don't affirm their extreme measures must be profoundly unhappy and hateful. That's the big contradiction. That's crazy. Well, true self-acceptance, and I mean in the classical sense, means coming to terms with the body that you have and the constraints of reality. I know we like to believe anything is possible, and it is. You can cut your penis off. But it's outside the constraints of reality. And the transgender community converts this and inverts this, that the body must be made to conform to the mind and not the other way around. And that society must be made to conform to the edited version of this body. And dissenters, people like me, are pathologized for noticing the edit. Oh, man. Biological sex is binary, and it's observable. There are disorders out there that are anomalies that are rare. Dimorphism or hermaphrodite, whatever, or atypical genitalia. Those are 0.0001%, right? They exist, and those people aren't any less valid people. And those physical disorders in these two cases, they may cause you some angst, and you may want to chop one or the other or do something, but ultimately, here's self-acceptance and self-love. You're born the way you're born. Own it, love it, be proud of it. That's true self-acceptance. Gender dysphoria is the real distress that is experienced by a very small number of people. The rest of it, I think, is, I'm going to say, fashion statement. And having compassion for these people, and I mean trans people all over, not just these with the anomalies, having compassion for these people. And understand, I have compassion. That don't require for me to pretend that sex is subjective or construct, or that medical transition is a healthy option. Especially when you haven't addressed the other psychological issues. All right. I wrote a thing here, and I'm gonna, this is an exploration, and it's kind of an analogy, and I want you to stay with me, but I wrote this. I was in deep thought over this stuff. You take a base model human, shaped by, well, divine design, millions of years of natural code, chromosomes, gametes, developmental pathways, our natural complex self. And then you try to feed it new code and new instructions and new cross-sex hormones. And you do the surgeries and you change according to social prompts and social pressures. That can generate a very, very convincing facsimile. The appearance will be different, clearly. Your secondary characteristics, the way you talk and the way your behavioral approximations to what you were a man, but now you act more like a woman. And the results can look pretty polished. And it can pass superficial scrutiny. And even it can serve some pretty specific functions, I suppose. But the underlying architecture never rewrites itself. That new code doesn't apply to the underlying architecture. It never changes. The original hardware, it remains. And it's still running. It's running on now edited parameters and edited commands. But there are no new gametes. There's no new DNA. The DNA is unchanged. The skeletal structure is unchanged. Your organ systems are unchanged. Your reproductive reality exists. And it's all running on the original code, the natural code. And what we see is just a simulation. It's not natural. And much like artificial intelligence, art, or deepfake AI video, you can tell that there's very impressive engineering there that's useful for certain purposes, very narrowly defined purposes. And you can barely distinguish the fake from the real. But much like AI, it lacks any organic soul of the real and original thing. It lacks any natural blooming of creation that wasn't somehow reverse engineered or whatnot. It's just manipulated filters layered over an unchangeable foundation. Something feels off. The essence wasn't organically transformed. It was simply edited. Excuse me. This whole thing, it's an overt structural contradiction. Structural contradiction. Structural contradiction. And they lecture us about the importance of self-love and simultaneously demand validation for the manipulation and in some cases mutilation of their own bodies to escape who they are. They demonize those of us who refuse to participate in the edit. And this is the contradiction that it runs through, well, what I see as a failing project. Good people, especially the trans people out there listening. The goal here is clarity on observable patterns and logical, intellectual consistency. It's not cruelty and it's not bigotry. And it's not hate, and it's not some sort of phobia. Internal suffering exists. I know it does. So don't view my honest examination of the causes and the evidence for practical and efficient remedies. Don't view that as hatred. It's not. That's what I have, good people. There's going to be a handful of podcasts forthcoming on various contradictions. Some of them are a little political and they hammer on the left, but don't worry, we're gonna look at the right as well when it comes to contradictions. So that's what's been going on in my mind past week or so, couple weeks. So anyway, I appreciate you listening. I appreciate your feedback. And if you disagree with me, I appreciate you hitting me up and let's talk about it. Okay. Please look at OspreyShootingSolutions.com. We got 2 events in August. We got Practical Pistol, early August, I think the 8th, and then we have a wild card day, mid-August. I'm not sure the date on that. September, for sure, we have a armed force-on-force, armed self-defense, force-on-force, scenario-based course, and that's a good one. It's an eye-opener, and that's up on the website. And then we're looking to the future. Well, I'm not going to drop this one yet. And then please check out twoteamguys.com. No, let me back up. OspreyShootingSolutions.com/consulting. Please check out all of our security consulting offerings. They are growing and they are robust. And the academics that come along with the SAFE modules, the SAFE program, Security Awareness in Foreign Environments, the academics there are just insane. So it's very beneficial and highly relevant, and especially in today's environment, but also especially for travelers, missionaries, humanitarian aid workers, overseas contractors of whatever flavor. Please check that out. I've been putting a lot of work into them. Let's see. Now, twoteamguys.com. Please check it out. Those are on-demand courses. So I don't schedule those. Those are scheduled by, like I said, demand. If you have 4 or more people, we can get you on the calendar for whatever your chosen course is. And then the thejuntopodcast.com is the website where the podcast can be found along with all the other platforms. And then finally, please give to givesendgo.com/help-a-homie-fund so that we can help people around town to be a little less downtrodden. Yep, trying to help people. Okay. Thank you, folks. I appreciate you and I love you. Take care.